The unexpected encounter. John Parker had always been a man who enjoyed solitude. He lived alone on the outskirts of a quiet town, spending his free time hiking through the nearby woods. It was on one of these hikes, just as the sun dipped below the horizon, that John noticed something unusual, a faint, glowing light emanating from the forest floor. Curiosity got the better of him. He followed the strange glow until he stumbled upon a large, smoldering crater. The air around it was oddly still, and the faint hum of energy buzzed in his ears. At the center of the crater stood a figure, a tall, slender woman with skin that shimmered like starlight. Her silver hair cascaded down her back, and her piercing blue eyes locked onto John the moment he arrived. Before John could react, the woman spoke, her voice soft yet commanding, echoing as if carried by the wind itself. "You will be my husband." John froze. The words didn't make sense, yet they sent a chill down his spine. "Excuse me," he stammered, taking a cautious step back. "Who are you? What are you doing here?" The woman tilted her head, studying him with an intensity that made him uncomfortable. "I am Zena, princess of the Alarian star system," she said as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "I have searched many galaxies to find you." "Me?" John's voice cracked. "You've got the wrong guy, lady." Zena's expression didn't change. "You are compatible," she stated firmly. "Our union is necessary. It is written in the stars." John felt a surge of panic. He turned to leave, but as he took his first step, a beam of light shot from a device on Zena's wrist, freezing him in place. His muscles refused to obey his commands, and he could do nothing but watch as she approached him. "You will not run," she said. "There is no escape from destiny." John struggled against the invisible force holding him, his heart pounding in his chest. "Listen, I don't know what kind of joke this is, but I'm not interested in being part of it." Zena raised an eyebrow, her expression softening slightly. "You are afraid," she observed. "This is understandable. Humans are fragile." "Fragile," John snapped, his frustration momentarily overriding his fear. "I'm not fragile, but I don't appreciate being kidnapped either." Zena sighed, releasing the beam and allowing him to move again. "I am not here to harm you," she said, "but your cooperation is essential. Without you, my people will perish." John rubbed his arms where the beam had held him, glaring at her. "You've got the wrong person. I don't know anything about saving alien civilizations or marrying space princesses." "You underestimate yourself," Zena replied. She gestured to the crater behind her, where a sleek, metallic ship was partially buried. "My vessel brought me here because of you. It detected your genetic compatibility with me, something rare among your kind." John opened his mouth to argue but stopped. The logic, or lack of it, was overwhelming. He was just an ordinary guy, not some chosen savior. Yet here was an alien princess insisting otherwise. Before he could think of what to say, a strange sound filled the air, a low rumble that seemed to vibrate in his chest. Zena stiffened, her expression shifting from calm to alarm. "They are here," she muttered under her breath. "Who's here?" John asked, but Zena didn't answer. Instead, she raised her wrist and tapped a glowing holographic interface. A shield of light materialized around the two of them, just as a massive explosion rocked the ground nearby. John's instincts kicked in, and he ducked instinctively, covering his head. Through the shimmering shield, he saw dark, mechanical shapes emerging from the trees. They looked like drones, sleek, black machines with sharp edges and glowing red sensors. They hovered menacingly, their weapons aimed directly at Zena. "They tracked me," Zena said, her voice tense. "We need to leave." John's head spun. "Leave? Where? I'm not going anywhere with you." "You have no choice," Zena snapped. "They will kill you to get to me. Come now, or you will not survive." Before John could protest further, Zena grabbed his arm. The shield around them expanded, forming a glowing sphere. With a flash of light, the world around them vanished. When the light faded, John found himself inside a strange futuristic room filled with floating screens and alien symbols. Zina released his arm, and he stumbled back, his knees weak. What just happened?" he demanded, his voice shaking. "We teleported to my ship," Zina explained, her tone brisk as she began typing on one of the glowing interfaces. "The drones will not stop until they destroy us. We must act quickly." John leaned against the wall, trying to steady his breathing. This couldn't be real. It felt like a dream or a nightmare. Yet the fear and confusion coursing through him were all too real. "I didn't sign up for this," he muttered to himself. Zina turned to face him, her expression serious. "Neither did I," she said softly. "But fate has brought us together. Whether you like it or not, John Parker, your life is now tied to mine." The reluctant captive. John woke up to the hum of machinery and a faint metallic smell. His head ached, and his muscles felt heavy. He blinked a few times, trying to make sense of his surroundings. He was in a small room with smooth silver walls that pulsed with faint, glowing lights. Strange symbols floated mid-air like holograms, and a soft vibration ran through the floor beneath him. "Where the hell am I?" he muttered, sitting up slowly. "You are aboard my ship," a calm voice answered. John turned to see Zina standing in the corner of the room. She looked regal and unbothered, her shimmering armor catching the light as if it were alive. In her hands, she held a sleek device that emitted soft, melodic beeps. "Why am I here?" John demanded, his voice rising. "Take me back home. I didn't agree to this." Zina glanced at him, her expression neutral. "I could not leave you behind. The bounty drones would have destroyed you to reach me. Your safety is now my responsibility." "Safety? You kidnapped me." John stood, his frustration boiling over. "You can't just take someone from their home and call it protection. I want out of this." Zina sighed, setting the device down. "You misunderstand the gravity of our situation. If I had not acted, you would be dead. Your objections are noted but irrelevant." "Noted but irrelevant," John echoed, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "You don't get to decide what's relevant in my life." Zina stepped closer, her piercing blue eyes locking onto his. "Your life is no longer just yours, John Parker. The bond between us has already begun. You may not feel it yet, but it ties your fate to mine. If I fail, you will suffer the consequences." John's fists clenched. "What bond? I didn't agree to anything." Zina tilted her head, her expression softening slightly. "Your consent was not required. The bond is determined by compatibility, not choice. It is rare and powerful." John's jaw dropped. "You mean to tell me that some cosmic force just decided I'm supposed to marry an alien princess, and I don't get a say? That's insane." "It is destiny," Zina said simply. "Destiny?" John laughed bitterly. "Destiny can shove it." Zina didn't respond immediately. Instead, she gestured toward a chair that materialized from the floor. "Sit. You need to understand what is at stake." "I don't want to understand," John said, though his legs betrayed him, and he sank into the chair. "I just want to go home." Zina walked to a panel on the wall and waved her hand over it. A holographic screen appeared, showing images of a distant planet. It was breathtaking, with skies of swirling gold and silver, vast crystal oceans, and cities that gleamed like jewels. But the beauty was marred by flashes of destruction, buildings collapsing, people fleeing, and dark shadows consuming the landscape. "This is my home," Zina said, her voice tinged with sadness. "Alaria, a once thriving world now on the brink of collapse." John stared at the images, his anger momentarily replaced by curiosity. "What happened?" "Our enemies," Zina explained. "They are relentless. My people's defenses have crumbled. Our only hope lies in forging a bond with an Earthling, someone whose biology can stabilize the energy field that sustains our planet. That someone is you." John's mind reeled. "Why me?" There are billions of people on Earth. Why not find someone who actually wants to help? Zina stepped closer, her gaze unwavering. You were chosen because you are compatible. Your genetic makeup aligns perfectly with mine. This is not a random decision. It is fate. John shook his head. I don't believe in fate. And I'm definitely not saving a planet I've never heard of. You will, Zina said with quiet certainty. Because deep down, you know you are more than the life you've been living. You are capable of greatness. Her words stung, not because they were harsh, but because they held a truth John didn't want to face. He had spent years hiding from the world, convinced he was just another ordinary man. But now, this alien woman was telling him he mattered in ways he couldn't comprehend. I didn't ask for this, he said softly, his shoulders slumping. I just wanted a quiet life. I know, Zina replied, but sometimes the universe has other plans. Before John could respond, the room's lights flickered and an alarm blared. Zina's calm demeanor vanished, replaced by sharp focus. They found us, she said, tapping her wrist device. The drones are closing in. John's stomach dropped. What do we do? We fight, Zina said, pulling a weapon from her side. A sleek, glowing staff that buzzed with energy. She tossed him a small round device. This will shield you temporarily. Stay close to me. Wait, fight. I'm not a fighter. John protested, catching the device awkwardly. You will be, Zina said, her voice firm, because survival depends on it. The door to the room slid open, and Zina stepped out, her weapon glowing brighter as the sound of approaching machines filled the air. John hesitated, clutching the shield device as fear surged through him. John, Zina called over her shoulder. If you want to live, follow me. Taking a deep breath, John pushed himself to his feet and followed her, his heart pounding as he plunged into the unknown. The bonding ritual. John paced back and forth in the small chamber Zina had guided him to after their narrow escape. The walls seemed alive, shimmering faintly with pulses of light that followed his movements. The room was eerily silent except for the occasional hum of distant machinery. He couldn't decide if the ship's design was calming or unsettling, but every part of it reminded him that he wasn't on Earth anymore. How am I supposed to just accept this? He muttered, running a hand through his hair. 1 minute, I'm hiking in the woods, and the next, I'm bonded to an alien princess. Zina entered the room, her expression as composed as ever. She carried a small spherical device that glowed softly in her hand. Her presence was both regal and intimidating, and John couldn't help but feel like a child being scolded every time she looked at him. You must stop resisting, she said firmly. Time is not on our side. John stopped pacing and glared at her. Stop resisting. You don't get it, do you? My life is over. Everything I knew, everyone I cared about, gone. And for what? Some cosmic matchmaking service. Zina's eyes narrowed. Your life is far from over, John Parker. In fact, it has just begun. John threw up his hands. You keep saying that like it's supposed to make me feel better. But you haven't even explained what this bonding thing is. What does it mean? Why is it happening? And why me? Zina stepped closer, holding out the glowing sphere. The bond is a union of minds and energy. It is how my people have survived for millennia. Alarians share a connection with their chosen partners that enhances both individuals. It strengthens us, heals us, and allows us to achieve what we cannot alone. That sounds like some sci-fi fairy tale, John said, crossing his arms. And you still haven't answered the most important question. Why me? Zina hesitated, a rare flicker of uncertainty crossing her face. The choice was not mine to make. My ship's AI analyzed billions of humans, searching for someone with the right genetic and emotional compatibility. You were the only match. John blinked. Emotional compatibility. What does that even mean? It means, Zina said softly, that you possess qualities my people have lost. Resilience, empathy, the ability to adapt under pressure, traits that are vital to the survival of my world. John shook his head in disbelief. So, what? You're saying I'm some kind of alien soulmate? Zina didn't answer directly. Instead, she activated the sphere, which floated into the air and began projecting a series of images. John saw flashes of Zina's planet, its people, and its struggles. He saw children playing in glowing fields, families gathered under strange twin moons, and then destruction. Explosions tore through cities, and dark, ominous ships descended from the skies. The bond isn't just about me or you, Zina said, her voice heavy with emotion. It's about saving millions of lives. My people are dying, John. Without this connection, without your help, there is no future for Ilaria. John stared at the images, his chest tightening. He could see the desperation in her people's faces, the hopelessness in their eyes. He wanted to look away, but he couldn't. Something about their plight tugged at him in a way he didn't fully understand. What happens if we don't bond? He asked quietly. Zina met his gaze, her expression grim. You will remain unharmed. The bond will fade over time. But my people will fall, and their deaths will be on your conscience. John felt a lump form in his throat. He hated the weight of her words, the way they made him feel responsible for something so far beyond his control. But even as he wrestled with his anger and fear, a small voice in the back of his mind whispered, "You can make a difference." "And if we do bond?" he asked after a long silence. Zina's expression softened. "If the bond is completed, your life will change. You will gain abilities beyond human comprehension. Strength, endurance, heightened senses. But more importantly, you will become a bridge between our worlds. Together, we can restore balance to Ilaria and ensure its survival." John let out a bitter laugh. "Abilities? Balance? You make it sound like I'm becoming a superhero." "In a way, you are," Zina said, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "But it is not without cost. The bond will alter you in ways you cannot undo. You will no longer be entirely human." That admission hit John like a punch to the gut. He stumbled back, gripping the edge of a table for support. "Not human? What does that even mean?" "You will still be yourself," Zina assured him. "But your connection to me, to Ilaria, will run deeper than anything you have ever known. It is a transformation, not a loss." John closed his eyes, trying to process everything. This was too much, too fast. He wasn't ready for any of it. But as he stood there, grappling with his fear and doubt, he realized something. Running away wasn't an option. Not anymore. "What do I have to do?" he asked finally, his voice barely above a whisper. Zina stepped forward, her eyes shining with something he couldn't quite identify. Hope, gratitude, maybe even admiration. "The bonding ritual is simple," she said. "It requires only that you open your mind to mine." "That's it?" John asked skeptically. "That is the beginning," Zina replied. "The rest will follow." John took a deep breath, his heart pounding. "Fine," he said. "Let's get this over with." Zina nodded, raising her hand toward the sphere. It began to glow brighter, and a soft warmth filled the room. As the light enveloped him, John felt a strange sensation, a pull, like an invisible thread connecting him to something vast and unfamiliar. And then, everything went black. The human spirit. John bolted upright, gasping for air. His surroundings were unfamiliar, yet again. A cramped room filled with flickering holographic panels and glowing lines running across the walls. It took a moment for him to realize he was still aboard Zina's ship. The bonding ritual had been strange. He remembered flashes of her memories, her childhood, her planet, the weight of her responsibility. But it felt like a dream that was already slipping away. Before he could process it further, the door slid open, and Zina entered, looking as composed as ever. Her eyes, however, held a glimmer of something new, concern. "You woke sooner than expected," she said, studying him carefully. "How do you feel?" "Like I just ran a marathon through someone else's life," John replied, rubbing his temples. What the hell was that? I saw things, your memories, your people. Is that normal? It is a side effect of the initial bond, Zina explained. Our minds are beginning to synchronize. Over time, the connection will deepen, and you will gain clarity. John scowled. Clarity? I feel like my head's about to explode. You will adapt, Zina said with a hint of impatience. Humans are resilient. It is one of your species' most admirable traits. John didn't respond. Instead, he swung his legs over the edge of the bed and stood, wobbling slightly. His entire body felt off. Not weak, exactly, but different, like his muscles were humming with some kind of latent energy. He shook his head, trying to focus. Look, I didn't agree to be your cosmic savior, okay? He said, his voice rising. You dragged me into this, and now you're telling me I'm stuck with it. But I still have a choice, right? I can walk away. Zina's expression hardened. You cannot walk away from what has already begun. The bond will fade if not completed, but the consequences for you, and for me, will be severe. Consequences? What kind of consequences? Instability, she said, her tone grim. Physically, mentally, emotionally. The partial bond leaves both participants vulnerable. It must either be fulfilled or severed, but severing it is dangerous. Dangerous how? John pressed. Zina hesitated, her gaze dropping to the floor. Severing the bond could kill you. The room seemed to tilt for a moment. John gripped the edge of a nearby table, his knuckles white. You're saying I'm trapped. I am saying that your life has changed, Zina said firmly. You can fight it or accept it. The choice is yours, but either way, you must decide soon. Our enemies will not wait for you to come to terms with your destiny. As if on cue, the ship shuddered violently, throwing John off balance. Alarms blared, and Zina immediately straightened, her hand flying to the device on her wrist. Her calm demeanor vanished, replaced by cold determination. They've found us, she said, her voice tight. The bounty drones have breached the outer shield. What? John shouted, his heart racing. How did they find us so fast? They are relentless, Zina replied. They will not stop until they capture me, or destroy us both. Great, John muttered. Just great. Zina tapped her wrist device, and the holographic panels in the room flickered, displaying a live feed of the ship's exterior. Several sleek black drones hovered around the hull, their red sensors glowing ominously. One of them fired a burst of energy at the ship, sending another jolt through the floor. We cannot outrun them in our current state, Zina said. Our only option is to fight. Fight? With what? John asked, his voice rising in panic. I don't know the first thing about fighting alien drones. You have human ingenuity, Zina said, as if that settled the matter. She handed him a small cylindrical device. This is an energy disruptor. Aim it at the drones and press the button. John stared at the device like it might explode in his hands. You've got to be kidding me. I am not, Zina said sharply. Do you want to live or not? Before John could respond, the door to the room slid open, revealing the narrow corridor bathed in red emergency lights. Zina stepped out without hesitation, her weapon, a glowing staff that crackled with energy, already in hand. Stay close to me, she called over her shoulder, and do not hesitate. John followed reluctantly, clutching the disruptor like a lifeline. The ship shook again, and the sound of metal grinding against metal filled the air. As they rounded a corner, a section of the ceiling caved in, sending sparks flying. This is insane, John muttered, his heart pounding. It is survival, Zina said simply. They reached a larger chamber, where a gaping hole in the wall revealed the vast expanse of space. 2 drones hovered just outside, their weapons charging. Zina didn't wait. She raised her staff and fired a beam of energy, striking one of the drones and sending it spiraling into the void. The second drone turned its attention to her, But John acted on instinct. He aimed the disruptor and pressed the button. A burst of blue energy shot out, hitting the drone and causing it to short-circuit. It dropped like a stone, disappearing into the blackness. John stared at the device in his hand, stunned. It actually worked. Of course it worked, Zina said, her tone almost amused. You are more capable than you think. Before John could respond, another wave of drones appeared, their red sensors glowing like ominous eyes. Zina and John braced themselves as the ship's defenses activated, firing beams of energy at the incoming threat. This is never going to end, is it? John said, his voice laced with exhaustion. Not until we reach safety, Zina replied. But you are stronger than you realize, John Parker. And together, we will endure. As the battle raged on, John felt a strange sense of resolve building within him. For the first time, he began to understand what Zina meant when she said humans were resilient. Maybe, just maybe, he could rise to the challenge. A dangerous threat. The ship was eerily silent after the power failure, the soft hum of machinery replaced by an oppressive stillness. John's heart pounded in his chest as he adjusted to the sudden darkness. His grip on the disruptor tightened, the cold metal grounding him in the chaos. What just happened? He whispered, though his voice carried in the silence. Zina stood beside him, her glowing staff faintly illuminating her face. Her expression was as composed as ever, but her eyes betrayed a sliver of tension. They've deployed an electromagnetic pulse. It has disabled most of our systems. Most of our systems, John repeated, his voice rising. What about life support, or shields? Life support is operating on a backup generator, Zina replied. But the shields are down. Great, John muttered, running a hand through his hair. So, we're sitting ducks. Zina turned to him, her gaze sharp. Not entirely. I can restart the main systems, but it will take time. You must hold them off until then. John blinked at her, incredulous. Hold them off? You mean me? Alone? With this? He held up the disruptor, which suddenly felt woefully inadequate. You will not be alone, Zina said. I will assist you once the systems are stabilized. But until then, the drones must be kept at bay. John opened his mouth to protest, but a loud metallic clang interrupted him. The sound echoed through the ship, sending a shiver down his spine. Something was trying to force its way inside. They're boarding, Zina said grimly. She turned to a nearby panel, her fingers flying across the holographic interface as she worked to restore the ship's systems. Go to the main corridor. The disruptor will work against their shielding. Aim for their central cores. John hesitated, his instincts screaming at him to stay put. But the urgency in Zina's voice, combined with the ever-growing sound of the intruders, pushed him into motion. Fine, he muttered, gripping the disruptor tightly. But if I die, I'm haunting you. Zina didn't respond, her focus entirely on the task at hand. John stepped into the corridor, his pulse racing. The red emergency lights flickered sporadically, casting eerie shadows that seemed to move with him. The ship groaned again, and then he saw them. 3 drones, sleek and menacing, floating toward him with mechanical precision. Their red sensors glowed like malevolent eyes, and their weapons hummed ominously. Okay, John muttered to himself, trying to steady his breathing. You've got this. Just aim and shoot. The first drone fired a bolt of energy, narrowly missing him as he dove behind a support column. He peeked out, raised the disruptor, and pressed the button. A blue pulse shot out, striking the drone squarely in its core. Sparks flew as the machine convulsed and crashed to the floor. Ha! John shouted, a surge of adrenaline fueling his confidence. 1 down. The other 2 drones responded immediately, their movements faster and more aggressive. John barely had time to duck as another energy bolt whizzed past his head, scorching the wall behind him. He scrambled to his feet, running toward a junction in the corridor. His mind raced, trying to remember Zina's instructions. Aim for the central cores. The drones pursued him relentlessly, their weapons firing in rapid succession. John darted around a corner, pressed himself against the wall, and waited. The sound of their mechanical whirring grew louder as they approached. His fingers tightened around the disruptor, sweat dripping down his forehead. As the first drone rounded the corner, John stepped out and fired. The pulse hit its mark, and the machine dropped with a satisfying crash. But the second drone was quicker. It swiveled its weapon toward him, and before he could react, a bolt of energy grazed his arm. Pain shot through him, and he stumbled back, clutching the wound. "Damn it," he hissed, gritting his teeth. The drone advanced, its weapon charging for another shot. John forced himself to focus, ignoring the searing pain in his arm. He raised the disruptor with his uninjured hand and fired. The pulse struck the drone's core, and it exploded in a shower of sparks. For a moment, the corridor fell silent again. John leaned against the wall, panting heavily. His arm throbbed, but he was alive. Somehow he had survived. "John," Zina's voice came through a nearby speaker, calm but urgent. "Are you injured?" "Just a scratch," he replied, though the wound burned fiercely. "I took down 3 of them." "Good," Zina said, "but more are coming. The ship's main systems are almost online. Hold your position." "Hold my position," John muttered. "Sure. Easy." He didn't have long to rest. Another loud clang echoed through the ship, followed by the sound of metal grinding against metal. This time, the sound was coming from multiple directions. "How many of these things are there?" John asked, his voice tinged with panic. "Enough to ensure our destruction," Zina replied matter-of-factly. "But they underestimated us." John let out a bitter laugh. "Us? I'm doing all the work." "Your efforts are commendable," Zina said. "Now stay focused. I am activating the ship's defenses." As if on cue, the emergency lights were replaced by bright white illumination, and a series of automated turrets descended from the ceiling. They swiveled into position just as another wave of drones appeared, opening fire with precision and efficiency. John watched in awe as the turrets dismantled the drones, their targeting systems far more advanced than anything he could manage. For the first time since the attack began, he felt a glimmer of hope. "Systems restored," Zina announced, stepping into the corridor with her staff glowing brightly. She glanced at John, her expression softening slightly. "You performed well." "I'm still alive," John said, shrugging. "I'll take that as a win." Zina approached him, her gaze lingering on his injured arm. "Let me see." "It's fine," he said, but she ignored him, placing her hand over the wound. A warm, tingling sensation spread through his arm, and the pain faded instantly. "Thanks," he muttered, flexing his fingers. "So what now?" "Now," Zina said, her tone resolute, "we prepare for the next wave. They will not stop until we face them head-on." John sighed, his brief moment of relief evaporating. Of course they won't. As Zina led him toward the ship's command center, John couldn't shake the feeling that the worst was yet to come. But despite his fear, a newfound determination burned within him. He wasn't just fighting for survival anymore. He was fighting for something greater, and for reasons he didn't fully understand, he was willing to see it through. The sacrifice. The command center was a hive of activity, its walls alive with holographic displays projecting data, schematics, and warning signals. Red lights pulsed like a heartbeat, and the air was thick with tension. John stood at the edge of the room, his grip tightening around the disruptor as Zina worked furiously at the central console. Her glowing staff leaned against the wall, ready for use at a moment's notice. "What do you mean?" "The bounty hunter is here," John asked, his voice laced with both fear and frustration. "I thought the drones were bad enough." Zina didn't look up. "The drones are tools, extensions of their master's will. The bounty hunter is far more dangerous. He is relentless, cunning, and will stop at nothing to capture me." "And what happens if he does?" John asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to know the answer. Zina paused, her fingers hovering over the console. "If he captures me, he will deliver me to the Council of Velok, my people's enemies. They will use my knowledge and genetic code to destroy Alaria entirely." John felt a cold weight settle in his chest. "And what about me? What happens to me?" "You are bonded to me," Xina said simply. "If I am taken, your bond will destabilize. You will suffer, and eventually, you will die." John stared at her, his mind racing. "You're really not great at giving people hope, are you?" Xina finally turned to face him, her expression softer than he'd ever seen it. "Hope is not given. It is forged in action. And right now, our actions determine the future of not just you and me, but millions of lives." Her words hit John like a hammer. He wanted to argue, to protest, to insist that he hadn't signed up for this, but deep down, he knew it wouldn't change anything. He was in this, whether he liked it or not. Before he could respond, a deep metallic voice echoed through the ship's speakers, sending a shiver down his spine. "Xina of Alaria," the voice boomed. "Surrender yourself, and I will spare your companion. Resist, and you both will die." John turned to Xina, his heart racing. "Who the hell is that?" "The bounty hunter," Xina said grimly. "His name is Kaler. He is infamous across galaxies for his ruthlessness, and he does not make empty threats." A holographic projection appeared in the center of the room, displaying the figure of Kaler. He was massive, easily twice in his size, clad in dark, angular armor that glowed faintly with pulsating red lines. His helmet obscured his face, but his glowing yellow eyes radiated menace. "You have 10 minutes to comply," Kaler said, "or I will tear this ship apart piece by piece." The projection vanished, leaving an oppressive silence in its wake. John exhaled slowly. "Okay, so what's the plan? Please tell me you have a plan." Xina returned to the console, her movements precise and deliberate. "Kaler is not invincible. He relies on his armor and advanced weaponry. But even he has weaknesses. We must exploit them." "We," John repeated. "You mean I'm supposed to go up against that thing?" "You have already proven yourself capable," Xina said without looking up. "The bond has made you stronger, more resilient. Together, we can defeat him." "Together," John said, his voice rising. "In case you haven't noticed, I'm just a guy with a fancy flashlight. You're the one with all the alien tech and superpowers." Xina stopped and turned to him, her gaze steady. "You underestimate yourself, John Parker. It is your humanity, your resourcefulness, your courage, that makes you powerful. I cannot succeed without you." John wanted to argue, but her words struck a chord he couldn't ignore. For all his fear and self-doubt, something deep inside him wanted to prove her right. "Fine," he said, swallowing hard. "What do we do?" Xina explained the plan quickly. Kaler would board the ship soon, and they would need to draw him into the engineering bay, where the ship's power core could be used to overload his armor. It was a risky move, one that would require perfect timing and coordination. As Xina spoke, John felt the weight of the situation pressing down on him. This wasn't just about survival anymore. This was about standing up against a force far greater than himself, about protecting not only Xina, but an entire world he'd never even seen. "Let's do it," he said finally, his voice steady despite the fear gnawing at him. The engineering bay was dimly lit, the power core at its center pulsing with a rhythmic glow. Xina stood by the control panel, her staff crackling with energy. John crouched behind a stack of metal crates, clutching the disruptor in one hand and a makeshift shield in the other. The sound of Kaler's heavy footsteps echoed through the bay as he entered, his massive frame casting long shadows across the room. His yellow eyes scanned the space, and a low growl emanated from his helmet. "Xina," he called, his voice dripping with contempt. "Hiding will not save you." Xina stepped forward, her staff raised. "I am not hiding, Kaler. I am waiting." Kaler laughed, a cold, mechanical sound. Brave words for someone so hopelessly outmatched. John's heart pounded as he watched the two face off. He gripped the disruptor tightly, waiting for Xena's signal. Kaler lunged, his massive blade slicing through the air. Xena dodged with inhuman speed, her staff striking his armor and sending a burst of energy through his body. He staggered but recovered quickly, his blade swinging again. As the battle raged, Xena shouted, "Now, John." John stepped out from its hiding spot, aiming the disruptor at Kaler's back. He fired, the pulse striking the weak point in the armor and causing sparks to fly. Kaler roared in pain, spinning to face him. "You dare." Kaler began, but John didn't let him finish. He fired again, this time at the bounty hunter's weapon, causing it to short-circuit. Xena took advantage of the distraction, activating the power core's overload sequence. "John, get clear," she shouted. John didn't need to be told twice. He ran toward the exit, glancing back to see Xena holding her ground as the core's energy surged. Kaler roared in fury, his armor cracking under the strain. At the last moment, Xena leaped back, and the power core unleashed a blinding surge of energy. The blast consumed Kaler, his screams echoing through the bay as his armor disintegrated. Together against the odds. The silence in the command center was suffocating, broken only by the rhythmic beeping of the ship's sensors. John leaned heavily against the wall, his chest heaving as he tried to catch his breath. The adrenaline that had carried him through the battle with Kaler was fading, leaving exhaustion and disbelief in its place. He glanced at Xena, who stood at the central console, her glowing staff resting against her side. Despite the battle they'd just survived, she looked as poised as ever, though her expression was grim. The holographic display in front of her showed a massive fleet of ships, their dark silhouettes blotting out the stars. "Tell me that's not what I think it is," John said, his voice hoarse. Xena didn't look at him. "It is worse than Kaler," she said quietly. "That fleet belongs to the Council of Velok. They are here to ensure my capture, or my death." John's stomach twisted. How did they get here so fast? "I thought Kaler was working alone." "So did I," Xena admitted. "But it seems he was a diversion. The Council used him to track me while they assembled their forces." John stared at the display, the sheer scale of the fleet making his head spin. "There's no way we can fight all of that. What are we supposed to do?" Xena finally turned to him, her gaze unwavering. "We survive." "Great plan," John said bitterly. "Care to explain how?" Xena tapped a series of commands into the console, bringing up a schematic of her ship. "Our only chance is to reach the Illyrian Nexus," she said. "It is an ancient structure capable of generating a protective shield strong enough to repel the Council's forces. But it is several light-years away, and the fleet will not let us escape easily." "Several light-years," John echoed. "We'll never make it." "We must," Xena said firmly. "The Nexus is not just our sanctuary. It is the key to restoring my planet's energy field. Without it, Illyria will fall, regardless of what happens to us." John ran a hand through his hair, trying to process the enormity of what she was saying. "So, no pressure, huh?" Xena stepped closer, her expression softening. "You have faced every challenge with courage, John. I believe in you." Her words caught him off guard, and for a moment, he didn't know what to say. He had spent his entire life avoiding responsibility, content to live quietly and stay out of the way. But now, this alien princess was looking at him like he was the only person in the universe who could make a difference. "Okay," he said finally, straightening up. "Let's do this." The chase. The ship jolted violently as Xena engaged the engines, and John grabbed onto a nearby rail for support. On the display, the Council's fleet began to move, their massive ships closing in like predators circling their prey. "We won't outrun them for long," Xena said as she navigated through the starfield. "Prepare for evasive maneuvers." "Evasive maneuvers," John repeated, his voice rising. "I thought you said this ship was advanced. Can't it?" "I don't know. Teleport us out of here." "The teleportation systems were damaged in the earlier battle," Zina said calmly. This ship is fast, but it is not invincible. We must rely on strategy. John groaned, clutching the disruptor tightly as the ship shuddered under enemy fire. Fantastic. Strategy. That's totally my specialty. Zina ignored his sarcasm, her focus unwavering. The ship weaved through the stars, dodging laser fire and missiles with precision. John watched in awe as Zina's hands moved over the controls, her every movement a blend of skill and instinct. Are you always this calm under pressure? He asked, trying to distract himself from the chaos outside. Zina allowed a faint smile. I was trained for moments like this. Must be nice, John muttered. I feel like my heart's about to explode. Another explosion rocked the ship, and Zina's smile vanished. They've locked onto us with a tractor beam, she said. We're being pulled in. John's stomach dropped. And I'm guessing that's bad. Extremely, Zina said. But I have an idea. The desperate plan. Zina led John to the engineering bay, where the ship's power core pulsed with a steady glow. She explained her plan quickly. She would overload the core to generate a massive energy burst, temporarily disabling the tractor beam and giving them a chance to escape. But the process was dangerous. If the timing was off, the entire ship could be destroyed. This sounds insane, John said, as he helped Zina adjust the settings on the core. How do you know it'll work? I don't, Zina admitted. But it is our only option. Great, John said with a nervous laugh. I'm really starting to love this whole life or death thing. As they worked, the ship trembled under the strain of the tractor beam. The lights flickered, and warning alarms blared, but Zina remained focused, her determination unshakable. Ready? She asked, looking at John. Not even a little, he replied. But let's do it anyway. Zina activated the overload sequence, and the power core began to glow brighter, its hum growing louder. The ship shook violently, and John braced himself against the wall. Now, Zina shouted. She released the energy burst, and the entire ship was enveloped in a blinding flash of light. The tractor beam shattered, and the Council's ships were momentarily disoriented. Zina seized the opportunity, pushing the engines to their limit and propelling the ship toward the Nexus. The final stretch. The Nexus came into view, a massive ancient structure floating in the void of space. Its golden surface shimmered with intricate patterns, and a faint pulsating glow radiated from its core. It was both beautiful and intimidating, a testament to the advanced civilization that had built it. We're almost there, Zina said, her voice tense. But the fleet is closing in. John looked at the display, his heart sinking as the Council's ships appeared on their tail. They're not giving up, are they? No, Zina said, but they will not reach us in time. The ship approached the Nexus, and Zina initiated the docking sequence. The Council's fleet opened fire, but the Nexus shield activated, deflecting the attacks with ease. As the ship docked, Zina turned to John. We made it. John let out a shaky laugh. Barely. The resolution. Inside the Nexus, Zina activated the ancient machinery, channeling its energy to restore Alaria's failing energy field. The process was long and complex, but with John's help, they succeeded. A holographic display showed Alaria glowing with renewed life, its skies and oceans restored to their former glory. You did it, John said, a smile breaking across his face. No, Zina said, turning to him. We did it. As they stood together, the weight of their journey finally lifted. John realized something profound. He had come so far from the man he was, scared, aimless, and unsure. Now he was part of something bigger, something that mattered. What happens now? He asked. Zina smiled softly. Now we face whatever comes next. Together.